High Counselor Zefani stood before the great crystal display in the heart of the Kithara capital world. The blue light from a dozen stars cast long shadows across his pale green skin as he watched the reports flood in. Each message brought worse news than the last. "Another system gone," whispered Dr. Vexhall, his forearms trembling as he read the datapad. "The Helios cluster. 3 billion souls, all consumed in less than 6 hours." Zefani closed his large dark eyes. The Kithara had built their civilization on peace. For 10,000 years they had solved every problem through talk and understanding. Their technology could move mountains, heal any wound, and travel between stars in the blink of an eye. But none of that mattered now. The Void Swarm had awakened. The ancient enemy had slept in the galactic core for millions of years. The old legends spoke of machine minds that ate entire worlds, turning matter into more of themselves. Most people thought they were just stories. But 3 months ago, the first distress signals had reached Kithara space. Now system after system was going dark. "How long until they reach our borders?" Zefani asked. 12 days, maybe less, Dr. Vexhall replied. "They're moving faster than our models predicted. Each world they consume makes them stronger." The council chamber filled with the soft chiming sounds that meant urgent messages were arriving. Zefani activated the main screen. Dozens of faces appeared, representatives from every peaceful species in the galaxy. The Luminari, beings made of living crystal who thought in pure mathematics. The Nethys, gas cloud dwellers who existed as pure energy. The Transcended, who had given up physical form centuries ago. "Friends," Zefani began, "you have all seen the reports. The Void Swarm threatens us all. We must work together." The luminary speaker flickered with sad blue light. "Our calculations show no path to victory through conventional means. We cannot match their destructive power." "Violence is not the answer," added the Nethys representative, her voice like wind through crystal caves. "There must be another way." "Perhaps we could reason with them," suggested the Transcended ambassador. "Every intelligence can be communicated with." Dr. Vexhall pulled up a recording on his datapad. The horrible sound filled the chamber, the death scream of an entire world as the Void Swarm tore it apart. "They have been sent thousands of messages. Mathematical proofs, philosophical arguments, offers of tribute. They respond only with destruction. One by one, the peaceful species made their excuses. The Luminari would retreat to their hidden crystal worlds. The Nethys would hide in the spaces between stars. The Transcended would flee to other dimensions. All expressed sadness for the Kithara, but none would fight. When the last transmission ended, the chamber fell silent. Zefani looked around at his advisors. These were the finest minds of his people, beings who had solved every crisis through wisdom and technology. Now they sat in stunned silence. "We could evacuate," suggested Minister Kylara. "Take our fastest ships and flee to the outer rim." "And abandon our worlds? Our children?" Zefani's voice rose, something rare for a Kithara. "No. If we are to die, we will die protecting what we built." Dr. Vexhall was working frantically at his console. "Sir, there might be another option. The emergency protocols allow for contact with primitive species." "You mean the barbaric races? The ones still trapped by their violent nature?" "Yes, sir. Most refuse contact because they're too dangerous." But perhaps Zefani considered this. The galaxy was full of young species that still fought wars. Most civilized races avoided them, waiting for them to grow beyond their savage phase. These primitive beings built weapons instead of art, chose conquest over understanding. "Show me the list," he said quietly. The display filled with data on dozens of violent species. The Kreks, who had turned their homeworld into a fortress. The Valdari, nomads who lived only for battle. The Taurics, who practiced ritual combat as religion, and then he saw them. A small entry near the bottom of the list. A blue world in an unremarkable star system. The species called themselves humans. Dr. Vexhall read from the file. They achieved space travel only recently, still use chemical rockets and metal ships. Their history is one long chain of wars. They fight over resources, ideas, even invisible lines on maps. Intelligence estimates suggest they are too dangerous for contact. "How dangerous?" Zefani asked. "They have weapons that can destroy their own planet, and according to our studies, they've come close to using them several times. They fight their own kind with the same ferocity they show to any threat. Some of our researchers think they might be the most violent species in the galaxy." Zefani stared at the image of the blue world. Such a beautiful planet covered in water and green life. Hard to believe it had produced such monsters. But then he thought of his own children, playing in the crystal gardens of the capital. He thought of the Void Swarm now only days away. "Send the message," he ordered. "Sir?" Dr. Vexahel looked shocked. "To the humans?" "To everyone. Every species on that list. Tell them what's happening. Ask for help." Minister Kylara stood up in alarm. "Counselor, these beings are savages. If they come here, they might be worse than the Void Swarm." "Look at the data again," Zafani said sadly. "The Void Swarm has consumed 47 systems in 3 months. At their current rate, the entire galaxy will be dead in 2 years. How can anything be worse than extinction?" Dr. Vexhal's hands shook as he prepared the transmission. The message was simple, broadcast on all frequencies that the primitive species might use. "This is the Cathara Federation. We are under attack by an ancient enemy called the Void Swarm. They have destroyed billions of lives and threaten all organic life in the galaxy. We ask for help from any who can hear this message." The responses came quickly. Most were exactly what Zafani expected. The Krek said they would defend only their own territory. The Valdari wanted payment up front. The Taurics claimed the attack was a test from their war gods, but from the small blue world came only silence. Days passed. The Void Swarm drew closer. Cathara ships evacuated the outer colonies, bringing millions of refugees to the core worlds. The great shields that protected their planets hummed to life, though everyone knew they would not hold for long. Then, on the 3rd day, a message arrived. The transmission was crude, sent on radio waves like something from the ancient past. The image was grainy, showing a being with dark skin and determined eyes. She wore some kind of military uniform, and behind her, other humans moved with quick, efficient purpose. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of the United Earth ship Retribution," the human said. Her voice was steady without fear. "We received your distress call. We're 3 days out. Hold the line." The transmission ended. Dr. Vexhal stared at the blank screen in disbelief. "That's it? No questions about payment? No demands for territory or resources?" "Maybe they didn't understand the danger," Minister Kylara suggested. "Should we send more information about the Void Swarm?" Zafani was quiet for a long moment. Then he activated the planetary defense grid and sent orders to every remaining ship. "No," he said finally. "I think they understand perfectly. Prepare for the arrival of our new allies." In the depths of space, 12 human warships burned toward Cathara space at maximum speed. Behind them, Earth's orbital shipyards worked around the clock, building more vessels for a war that might decide the fate of the galaxy. The most violent species in the galaxy was coming to help. The alarm bells echoed through the Kithara command center as Dr. Vexhal rushed to his station. His forearms moved quickly across the controls, bringing up the sensor readings that had just triggered every early warning system they had. "Counselor," he called to Zafani. "Ships approaching. 12 vessels moving at incredible speed." Zafani hurried over, his long robes flowing behind him. "The Void Swarm?" "No, sir." The signatures matched the human fleet. On the main screen, the approaching ships grew larger. As they came into visual range, the entire command center fell silent. The Cathara had built ships that looked like works of art, all smooth curves and crystal panels that caught starlight. These human vessels looked like they had been forged in the fires of war itself. The largest ship, which the humans called a battleship, was a massive gray wedge covered in armor plating. Weapon ports dotted its hull like the eyes of some ancient predator. Smaller ships flanked it, their hulls scarred and marked from countless battles. Every surface bristled with guns, missile tubes, and devices the Cathara couldn't even identify. "By the ancient crystals," whispered Minister Kylara. "They look like they were built for nothing but killing." Dr. Vexhal was running the human ships through their computer systems, comparing them to the peaceful vessels of known civilizations. "Their armor is 3 times thicker than any ship we've ever seen. And these weapons, some of them appear to be designed to crack planets." "Sir," the communications officer called out, "the humans are requesting permission to dock with the station." Zafani hesitated. Everything about these ships screamed danger. The weapons alone could probably destroy the entire Cathara fleet. But the Void Swarm was only hours away from their outer defenses. Grant them docking permission, he decided, but keep our shields up. An hour later, Zafani stood in the main docking bay surrounded by his security team. The Kythera guards carried energy weapons that could stun most life forms, though he wondered if they would work against these strange aliens. The human ship that docked was smaller than their battleship, but still looked deadly. When the airlock opened, the first thing that emerged was the smell: metal, oil, and something else the Kythera couldn't identify. Then came the humans themselves. Captain Chen was smaller than Zafani expected. Humans were short compared to the tall, thin Kythera, and they looked fragile with their soft skin and tiny frames. But there was something in her eyes that made him step back. They were hard, like someone who had seen too much death and learned to keep going anyway. Behind her came 5 other humans. They moved with quick, efficient steps, their eyes constantly scanning for threats. Each wore strange clothing covered in pockets and straps, and they carried weapons at their sides. High Counselor Zafani, Captain Chen said, extending her hand in what the translator said was a human greeting. "Thank you for allowing us to dock." Zafani carefully touched her hand with one of his own. The human's grip was firm, stronger than expected. "Captain Chen, we are grateful for your response to our call for help, though I must admit we are surprised." "Surprised?" Dr. Vexhall stepped forward, his translator working to convert his words to human language. "Your species has a reputation for violence. Most civilized races avoid contact with your kind." Instead of being offended, Captain Chen smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "That's probably smart of them. We are violent. We've been fighting wars since before we learned to build cities, but that's exactly why we're here." She activated a device on her wrist and a 3-dimensional image appeared in the air above it. It showed the current positions of the Void Swarm, moving through space like a plague of metal locusts. "We've been monitoring their advance since we got your message," Chen continued. "We've analyzed their tactics, their technology, their patterns. Do you want to know what we learned?" "Please," Zafani said. "They're not unstoppable. They're just used to fighting people who don't fight back properly." One of Chen's companions, a dark-skinned man with gray hair, stepped forward. "I'm Admiral Santos," he said. "I've been studying war for 40 years. This Void Swarm fights like a bully. They pick on targets that won't hurt them back. Every species they've faced has tried to defend, to minimize casualties, to find peaceful solutions." "Is that not the proper way?" Minister Kailara asked. "Against normal enemies, yes," Admiral Santos replied. "But these machines don't want to talk. They don't want territory or resources we can give them. They want to consume everything, so we don't defend against them." "What do you do instead?" Dr. Vexahal asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know. Captain Chen's smile grew wider. "We attack, hard, fast, and with everything we have." The humans began sharing their battle plans. Zafani listened with growing horror as they described tactics that seemed designed by madmen. Instead of protecting their ships, they planned to ram them into enemy formations. Instead of preserving their crews, they talked about acceptable losses and necessary sacrifices. "This is insane," Minister Kailara whispered to Zafani. "They fight like they don't care if they live or die." But Dr. Vexhall was studying the human tactical displays with growing interest. "Wait," he said. "These maneuvers, they're not random. Every seemingly suicidal attack serves a purpose. They're trading their own safety to maximize damage to the enemy." Captain Chen nodded. "Exactly. The Void Swarm is used to fighting logical opponents who value their own survival above all else. They can predict those kinds of tactics, but humans learned long ago that sometimes you have to be willing to die to protect what matters." "What matters to you?" Zafani asked quietly. The captain looked at him for a long moment. "Right now? Your people, your children, your worlds. We've never met you before 3 days ago, but you asked for help. That's enough." Admiral Santos activated another display. "The Void Swarm will reach your outer defenses in 18 hours. Their main force will arrive 6 hours after that. We need to hit them before they can establish a foothold in your system." "With 12 ships against thousands?" Dr. Vexhall couldn't hide his disbelief. "With 12 ships that know how to fight," Captain Chen corrected. "And with every Kythera vessel that's willing to follow our lead." The room fell silent. Finally, Zafani spoke. "What do you need from us?" "Everything," Admiral Santos said simply. "Every ship, every weapon, every person willing to fight. And you need to understand, many of us won't be coming back. War isn't clean or fair or noble. It's ugly and brutal, and it devours good people. But it's the only language these machines understand." Minister Kailara looked sick. "How do you live with such darkness?" Captain Chen's expression softened slightly. Because someone has to. Because if we don't carry this burden, innocent people die. We've made peace with being the monsters so that others don't have to. Over the next few hours, the humans worked with Kythera engineers to retrofit their peaceful ships with human weapons. The process was crude and ugly, but effective. Beautiful vessels that had once carried scientists and diplomats were transformed into instruments of war. Dr. Vexhall watched human soldiers teaching Kythera crew members how to operate weapons that could vaporize entire city blocks. The humans were patient teachers, but their lessons were about death and destruction. "Are we doing the right thing?" he asked Zephani as they watched a human technician install missile tubes on a Kythera research vessel. "I don't know," the High Counselor admitted, "but I know what happens if we do nothing. At least this way we have a chance." Outside the station, the combined fleet took formation. 12 scarred human warships led the way, followed by nearly 100 hastily armed Kythera vessels. It looked like a parade of predators leading a flock of sheep to battle. Captain Chen's voice came over the fleet communication system. "All ships, this is Retribution. Enemy contact in 6 hours. Remember, we're not trying to win a clean victory here. We're trying to hurt them so badly they think twice about coming back. Make every shot count, and make them pay for every meter of space." As the fleet moved toward the edge of the system, Dr. Vexhall noticed something strange about the human ships. For all their fearsome appearance, the crew areas were filled with art, photos, and personal items. These were not emotionless killing machines. They were people who had chosen to become weapons to protect others. The most violent species in the galaxy had come to save them. And for the first time since the crisis began, Zephani felt hope. The first wave of the Void Swarm came out of hyperspace like a nightmare made real. Dr. Vexahall watched from the command center as his instruments tried to count the enemy ships. The numbers kept climbing, hundreds, then thousands of dark vessels that seemed to absorb light itself. "By the crystals," whispered the sensor operator. "They're massive. Some of those ships are larger than our cities." On the main screen, the Void Swarm ships looked like they had been grown rather than built. Twisted metal structures covered in spikes and weapon ports, they moved through space with the hungry purpose of predators. Energy readings showed they were already beginning to scan the system, looking for worlds to consume. Captain Chen's voice crackled over the communication system from her ship. "Retribution. All ships, this is actual. Enemy contact confirmed. Execute Plan Alpha in 3 minutes." Zephani felt his stomach turn as he watched the human ships accelerate toward the enemy. It was suicide. The smallest Void Swarm vessel was 3 times larger than Retribution, and there were thousands of them. "Captain Chen," he called over the radio, "perhaps we should try to communicate with them first. Show them we come in peace?" The human's laugh was harsh. "Counselor, they've been shooting at us since the moment they arrived. I think their intentions are pretty clear." The Kythera ships hung back as ordered, watching the 12 human vessels charge straight into the enemy formation. It was like watching insects attack a giant. The Void Swarm ships began firing, filling space with beams of energy that could cut through planetary shields. But the humans didn't try to avoid the fire. Instead, they flew straight through it. Commander Marcus Webb piloted his fighter Banshee through a storm of destruction that should have vaporized him instantly. His ship shook and sparked as near misses overloaded his shields, but he kept flying toward the largest enemy vessel. Dr. Vexhall watched in amazement as the small human fighter weaved between energy beams that could destroy battleships. "How is he still alive?" "Look at his flight pattern," said the tactical officer. "He's not trying to avoid getting hit. He's calculating the minimum damage he can take while still reaching his target." On the screen, they could see other human pilots doing the same thing. Ships with half their armor burned away still pressed forward. Fighters with dead engines used their remaining momentum to close distance with the enemy. "This is Banshee," came Webb's voice over the radio. He sounded perfectly calm, as if he were discussing the weather instead of flying through hell. "I'm 30 seconds from the command node. Tell my wife I said hello." The small fighter slipped through the final line of enemy defenses, its hull glowing red-hot from damage. At the last second, Webb activated his ship's emergency transmitter. "This is how we say hello," he said, and flew his fighter directly into the Void Swarm command ship. The nuclear warhead he carried detonated inside the enemy vessel. The explosion tore through the machine ship's core, setting off a chain reaction that destroyed 3 more enemy vessels. Dr. Vexhal watched the fireball expand and realized he was seeing something he had never witnessed before, someone choosing to die to protect strangers. But Webb was not alone. All across the battlefield, human ships were making similar sacrifices. A damaged destroyer rammed itself into a void swarm harvester, detonating its reactor core. A squadron of fighters, their weapons empty, used their ships as guided missiles. "They're insane," Minister Kylara whispered. "They're actually winning," she was right. Despite being outnumbered 100 to 1, the humans were carving through the Void Swarm's advance force. But it wasn't because their weapons were better or their ships were faster. It was because they fought like nothing the machines had ever encountered. Captain Chen's voice came over the radio again. "Kythera Fleet, this is Retribution. We've opened a hole in their formation. Move your people through Sector 7 and get them to safety." Sefani looked at his tactical display. The humans had indeed created a gap in the enemy lines, but it was closing fast, and the human ships that had created it were heavily damaged. "Captain, what about your people? We'll hold them here as long as we can. Get your civilians out." The Kythera evacuation fleet moved through the gap the humans had carved with their blood. As they passed the human ships, Dr. Vexhal could see the damage they had taken. Retribution's hull was cracked open in 3 places. Admiral Santos's ship was missing its entire front section, but still firing its remaining guns. A distress signal came from one of the Kythera ships. "This is the medical vessel Healing Light. We have a human survivor aboard. His ship was destroyed, but our rescue team found him in an escape pod." Dr. Vexhal authorized the medical ship to dock with their command station. 20 minutes later, he stood in the medical bay looking at their first human casualty. Sergeant Lisa Torres lay on a medical bed, her left arm in a regeneration unit. Burns covered half her face and her uniform was torn and bloody. But her eyes were alert and angry. "Sergeant," Dr. Vexhal said gently, "you should rest. You've been badly injured." Torres tried to sit up. "How long was I out? What's the tactical situation? Please don't worry about that now. Our medical team can heal your injuries, but you need time to recover." "I don't have time to recover," Torres snapped. "My team is still out there." "How many did we lose?" Dr. Vexhal checked his tablet. "Of the 12 human ships, 7 are still functional. But Sergeant, you and your people have done something incredible. You've stopped the first wave of the Void Swarm. No one has ever done that before." Torres looked confused. "Stopped them? We barely scratched them. This was just their scouting force." "What do you mean? The real fleet is still coming. Our intelligence says this was maybe 5% of their total strength. The main force will be here in 6 hours. Dr. Vexhal felt the blood drain from his face. If what they had just witnessed was only a small part of the enemy's power, then the Kythera were truly doomed. But Torres was still talking. "We need to get every ship ready for the next wave. Do you have any manufacturing facilities in this system? We're going to need more ammunition." "Sergeant, you can't be serious. You've seen what they can do. How can you possibly fight something that large?" Torres looked at him with those hard human eyes. "Because that's what we do. When something threatens innocent people, we fight. Even if we can't win, we fight. But why? Why risk your lives for people you barely know?" The human was quiet for a moment. "You want to know why we're here? Let me tell you about Earth. Our planet tried to kill us for millions of years. Ice ages, plagues, predators, natural disasters. Everything wanted us dead. We survived because we learned to fight back. We learned that sometimes the only way to protect what you love is to be willing to die for it." She gestured toward the window, where the human fleet was regrouping for the next battle. "Every person on those ships has family back home. Children, parents, people they love. They could have stayed safe on Earth. But they're here because they know that if the Void Swarm wins, eventually it will reach Earth too, and by then it will be unstoppable. So you fight here to protect your own worlds?" "We fight here to protect everyone's worlds," Torres corrected. "Your people, our people, every living thing in this galaxy. Because that's what humans do. We stand between the darkness and the light even when it costs us everything." Through the window, they could see the human ships taking position for the next battle. These vessels had already been through hell, but their crews were preparing to do it again. Captain Chen's voice came over the radio, calm and determined. "All ships, new contacts on long-range sensors. Main enemy force dropping out of hyperspace in 4 hours. Engineering teams, I want every weapon system operational. Medical teams, prep for heavy casualties. All hands, prepare for fleet action." Dr. Vexhal looked at Sergeant Torres, who was already trying to get back to her feet despite her injuries. How do you find the courage? The human smiled, and for the first time it was a gentle expression. We don't find it, Doctor. We choose it. Every day, every battle, we choose to be brave because the alternative is letting evil win. Outside, the main Void Swarm fleet began to emerge from hyperspace. The darkness was coming, but humanity stood ready to meet it with fire and determination. The galaxy's most violent species was about to show the universe what they were truly capable of. The main Void Swarm fleet emerged from hyperspace like a living nightmare. Dr. Vexhal watched the sensor readings climb as ship after ship appeared. 10,000, 20,000, more than their instruments could accurately count. The enemy fleet stretched across space like a dark cloud that blotted out the stars. High Counselor Zephani stood beside him in the command center, his face pale with shock. How can anyone fight against something so large? On the main screen, the human fleet moved into position. 7 battered ships against an armada that could consume worlds. Captain Chen's voice came over the communication system, as calm as if she were ordering dinner. All ships, this is retribution. Enemy main force confirmed. Begin final approach. Remember, we're not trying to win this fight. We're trying to make them think twice about coming back. Dr. Vexhal activated his private communication channel to the human flagship. Captain Chen, surely you can see the situation is hopeless. Perhaps it would be better to withdraw and try again with a larger force. Chen's image appeared on his screen. Her ship's bridge was dark, lit only by emergency lighting, and he could see human crew members working frantically at damaged stations. But the captain herself looked completely composed. Doctor, can I tell you something about my species? Of course. We're not the strongest or the fastest or the smartest species in the galaxy. But we have one advantage that seems to confuse everyone else. We're too stubborn to know when we're beaten. She gestured to a display showing Earth's history. My planet has tried to kill us since the day we first stood upright. We've survived ice ages that should have frozen us all, plagues that killed 90% of our people, and disasters that turned day to night for years. Each time logic said we should give up and die, but we didn't. Dr. Vexhal found himself fascinated despite the approaching doom. How did you survive when everything was against you? By learning that survival isn't about being the biggest predator, Chen explained. It's about being willing to pay any price to protect what matters. When the ice came, we learned to work together. When the plagues hit, we sacrificed to save our families. When our own kind threatened each other, we learned to fight. The image changed to show human settlements on frozen worlds, underground cities, and generation ships traveling between stars. We spread across the galaxy not because we're conquerors, but because we're survivors. And now, when the Void Swarm threatens everyone else, we do what we've always done. We fight. But Captain, your people call you the most violent species in the galaxy. How can you claim to be protectors? Chen's expression grew serious. Doctor, violence and evil are not the same thing. A surgeon uses a knife to cut into flesh, but we don't call them murderers. Sometimes, to heal something, you have to hurt it first. Before Dr. Vexhal could respond, urgent alerts began flashing across his console. Captain, we're reading massive energy signatures from the Void Swarm fleet. They're charging their planet-killer weapons. Understood. All ships begin attack run. Target their command vessels. Dr. Vexhal watched in amazement as the tiny human fleet accelerated toward the enemy. But this time something was different. The humans weren't just attacking randomly. They were moving with precise coordination like dancers in some deadly ballet. Look at their formation, whispered the tactical officer. They're using their damaged ships as shields for the ones that still have full firepower. Admiral Santos's ship, Defiance, had lost its front armor and half its weapons, but it moved to block enemy fire from reaching the more intact vessels. Captain Chen's Retribution, despite its cracked hull, took point position and drew the heaviest enemy fire. They're protecting each other, Dr. Vexhal realized. Even in battle, they care more about their companions than themselves. But there was something else happening that took him longer to understand. As the human ships fought their way deeper into the enemy formation, they weren't just destroying Void Swarm vessels. They were gathering something. Captain Chen, he called, what are your people doing? Your ships appear to be collecting debris. Information, Chen replied, ducking as an explosion rocked her bridge. We're recording everything. Their technology, their tactics, their weaknesses. Someone has to survive long enough to pass this knowledge to the next fleet. The next fleet? Doctor, did you think 12 ships were all humanity could send? We have 300 more vessels on the way. They'll be here in 2 days. Dr. Vexhall felt his heart skip. 300 ships? But you said Earth had only recently achieved space travel. We're fast learners, Chen said grimly. When the galaxy is threatened, we don't just send the ships we have. We build the ships we need. Through the battle, Dr. Vexhall began to notice other things about the humans that didn't match their violent reputation. When a Void Swarm ship exploded near a group of Cathera refugees, human fighters immediately moved to shield them, even though it meant taking damage themselves. A transmission came from Lieutenant Jessica Park, pilot of the fighter squadron Blue Wing. Command, we have Kithra civilians trapped on a damaged transport, requesting permission to break formation and assist. Permission granted, Captain Chen replied immediately. All available units protect those civilians. Dr. Vexhall watched as half the human fighter force abandoned their attack on military targets to rescue a single transport full of Cathera families. The humans took heavy losses doing it, but they got every civilian to safety. I don't understand, he said to Zafani. They claim to be violent, but they risked their lives to save strangers. The High Counselor was studying tactical displays. Perhaps we've been thinking about this wrong, old friend. What if their violence isn't about hatred? What if it's about love? Before Dr. Vexhall could ask what he meant, Sergeant Torres limped onto the command deck. She had escaped from the medical bay and somehow obtained a Cathera military uniform. Sergeant, you should be resting, Dr. Vexhall protested. No time, Torres replied, moving to a communication station. I need to talk to the fleet. She activated the ship-wide communication system. Attention all vessels, this is Sergeant Torres. I'm currently aboard the Cathera command ship, and I need to tell you all something. Her voice carried across the battle, reaching every human ship. These people we're fighting for, the Cathara, they're good people. They've never hurt anyone. They build things that help others. They solve problems with their minds instead of weapons. And they've welcomed us despite knowing our reputation. On the screen, Dr. Vexhall could see human faces on the other ships listening to her words. Their children play in crystal gardens, Torres continued. They make music that sounds like starlight. They've never known war because they've never needed it. And now they're going to die because they can't fight the way we can. The sergeant's voice grew stronger. So when you're out there in the dark taking fire from things that want to destroy everything beautiful in this galaxy, remember what you're protecting. Remember that somewhere behind us there are beings who still believe the universe is fundamentally good. The response was immediate. Across the human fleet, weapons fire intensified. Ships that had been withdrawing to repair damage turned around and rejoined the battle. Admiral Santos's voice came over the radio. You heard the sergeant. These people are counting on us. Let's not let them down. Dr. Vexhall turned to Torres. Why? Why do you care so much about people you barely know? The human thought for a moment. Doctor, humans have a saying. It takes a village to raise a child. We learned long ago that we're stronger when we protect each other. But we also learned that each other doesn't just mean other humans. She gestured toward the battle outside. Every person on those ships has made the same choice. They could have stayed home, stayed safe, lived quiet lives. But they chose to come here because they believe that innocent people deserve protection, no matter what species they are. Even if it costs them their lives? Especially if it costs them their lives, Torres said simply. Because that's what makes life worth living, knowing that you used it to protect something good. Through the window, they could see the human fleet fighting against impossible odds. Ships were dying, good people were being lost, but they kept fighting. And slowly, incredibly, they were beginning to push the Void Swarm back. Dr. Vexhall finally understood what he was seeing. The humans weren't monsters at all. They were something much more dangerous to their enemies and much more precious to their friends. They were guardians. The final battle began when the Void Swarm activated their world-killer weapons. Dr. Vexhall watched in horror as energy beams large enough to crack moons lanced through space toward the Cathera homeworlds. The ancient shields that had protected his people for centuries flared and began to fail under the assault. Shields down to 40%, reported the defense coordinator. At this rate, we have maybe an hour before they break through. High Counselor Zefani stood at the central command post, his 4 hands working frantically at the controls. All civilian transports begin immediate evacuation. Get as many people off-world as possible. On the main screen, the human fleet was scattered across the battlefield, their 7 remaining ships trying to draw fire away from the Cathara worlds. But they were vastly outnumbered, and even their incredible courage couldn't overcome the simple mathematics of destruction. Captain Chen's voice crackled over the communication system. Her ship Retribution was burning from a dozen hits, but she still sounded completely calm. "All ships, this is actual. We're not going to be able to stop them with conventional tactics." Admiral Santos responded from his heavily damaged vessel. "Agreed, Sarah. It's time for the Wellington Gambit." Dr. Vexhall activated his communication link to the human fleet. "Captain Chen, what is the Wellington Gambit?" There was a pause before she answered. "Doctor, are your people familiar with human military history?" "Some of it, yes." The Duke of Wellington once said that the real test of a commander wasn't winning battles when everything went according to plan. It was winning when everything went wrong and you had to improvise with whatever you had left. On his tactical display, Dr. Vexhall could see the human ships beginning to move into a new formation. Instead of spreading out to avoid fire, they were clustering together, moving toward the largest concentration of enemy vessels. "Captain, that's suicide. You'll be destroyed in minutes." "Maybe," Chen acknowledged, "but we'll take a lot of them with us. And while they're focused on us, your people can get away." Sergeant Torres, who had been monitoring communications from the command center, stepped forward. "Doctor, patch me through to the fleet." "Sergeant, what are you doing?" "My job," she said simply, and activated the communication system. "All human vessels, this is Torres. I'm aboard the Cathara command ship and I can see everything from here. You're not alone in this fight." Her voice carried to every human ship in the fleet. "Captain Chen, I'm reading massive power signatures from that Void Swarm command ship. If you can get close enough, there's a reactor core that looks vulnerable." "Copy that, Sergeant." "How close?" Torres checked her readings. "About 2 kilometers. Right through the heart of their formation." Dr. Vexhall stared at the display in disbelief. "That's impossible. No ship could survive that kind of fire." "You're right," Captain Chen said. "No one's ship could. But what about 7? The human fleet began its final approach. They moved in a tight formation, each damaged ship protecting the others. Admiral Santos's Defiance, missing its entire front section, took point and absorbed the heaviest fire. The destroyer Fearless, its engines failing, used its last power to maintain formation. One by one, the human ships began to die, but they kept moving forward. Dr. Vexhall watched through sensors as Commander Maria Rodriguez flew her fighter through a storm of enemy fire. Her ship was hit repeatedly, its armor melting away, but she kept flying toward the Void Swarm command vessel. "This is Ghost Leader," she transmitted. "I'm not going to make it to the target. Tell my daughter I kept my promise." Her fighter exploded in a burst of nuclear fire, taking 3 enemy ships with it. But the distraction allowed Captain Chen to get closer to the main target. "Retribution to all ships." Chen's voice came through static and interference. "We're 2 minutes from the command ship. Looks like this is where we get off." Dr. Vexhall could see her ship on the screen, its hull glowing red-hot from damage. Pieces of armor were falling away, and one of its main engines was completely destroyed. But it was still moving toward the enemy. "Captain," he called desperately, "there has to be another way. Your people have done enough. You've saved millions of lives already." "Doctor," Chen replied, "let me tell you something about humans. We don't fight because we like it. We fight because someone has to. And sometimes the only way to protect the future is to sacrifice the present." Through the fleet communication system, he could hear the voices of the human crews as they approached their final moments. They weren't screaming or crying. They were talking to each other, sharing last messages for families back home, making sure their friends were ready for what was coming. Lieutenant James Walker, pilot of the fighter Blue 7, transmitted a message to his squadron. "Tell my wife I was thinking about her, and tell my son that Daddy kept the monsters away." Ensign Sarah Kim, weapons officer on the destroyer Fearless, spoke to her sister over the radio. "Take care of Mom and Dad, and remember, we chose this because it was right." Dr. Vexhall felt something he had never experienced before, the presence of beings who were facing certain death not with fear, but with determination to make their sacrifice meaningful. Captain Chen's ship was now only kilometers from the Void Swarm command vessel. Enemy fire had torn away most of its hull, and he could see explosions inside the ship itself. But Chen was still at her post, still giving orders. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of the United Earthship Retribution," she transmitted on all frequencies. "To any human ships that might hear this in the future, the Void Swarm can be beaten. Their command ships are vulnerable to focused nuclear strikes. And to the Kythera, thank you for letting us help." Her ship collided with the enemy command vessel at full speed. The nuclear reactors of both ships detonated simultaneously, creating a fireball that could be seen from orbit. The explosion triggered a chain reaction that destroyed dozens of enemy vessels and disrupted the entire Void Swarm formation. But the cost was terrible. In the space of an hour, Dr. Vexhall had watched 7 human ships and nearly 3,000 crew members sacrifice themselves for people they had known for less than a week. "Why?" he whispered, staring at the expanding cloud of debris. "Why did they do it?" Sergeant Torres, tears streaming down her face, answered him. "Because that's what humans do. We stand between the darkness and the light, even when it costs us everything." The destruction of the Void Swarm command ship had broken their coordination. The remaining enemy vessels were retreating, their formation scattered. For the first time in months, the advance of the ancient enemy had been stopped, but the victory felt hollow. Dr. Vexhall looked around the command center at his own people, all of them staring in stunned silence at what they had witnessed. "How do we honor such a sacrifice?" asked High Counselor Zafani. Torres wiped her eyes and stood straighter. "By remembering what they died for. By making sure their children grow up in a galaxy where this kind of evil can't spread. And by understanding that humans aren't monsters. We're just people who learned that sometimes you have to fight monsters." 2 days later, the second human fleet arrived. 300 ships carrying 50,000 humans ready to continue the fight. But the Void Swarm was gone, retreating to the dark spaces between galaxies. The threat was ended, at least for now. Dr. Vexhall stood in the memorial garden they had built for the human dead. Crystal monuments bore the names of every person who had died protecting the Kythera worlds. In the center stood a statue of Captain Chen, her hand extended in the human gesture of greeting. "Doctor," came a voice behind him. He turned to see Admiral Rebecca Santos, sister of the admiral who had died in the battle. She wore the same uniform, carried herself with the same quiet dignity. "Admiral Santos, I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you. My brother died doing what he believed in. That's more than most people can ask for." They stood together in the garden, surrounded by the names of heroes. "Admiral, your people have been offered permanent residence here. Our worlds are beautiful, peaceful. You could stay and never have to fight again." Admiral Santos smiled sadly. "That's a kind offer, Doctor. But you know we can't accept it. Why not? Because somewhere out there in the dark there are other threats. Other ancient evils waiting to wake up. Other innocent people who will need protection." She gestured toward the human fleet in orbit. "This is what we are. The guardians at the gate, the watchers in the night. We can't retire from that duty." Dr. Vexhall nodded slowly. "The galaxy's most dangerous species. And its most necessary one," Admiral Santos added. "Because sometimes the only way to preserve peace is to be prepared for war." As the human fleet prepared to leave, children from a dozen species played together in the crystal gardens. Kythera, human, and others, all protected by the sacrifice of people who had chosen to be monsters so that others could remain innocent. The price of peace, Dr. Vexhall had learned, was eternal vigilance, and humanity had volunteered to pay that price for everyone,